standing next to her under the shade of the pomegranate tree, had caught Hannah by the arm before she struck her head on the wellhead. Such had been her grief that not until several days later did Hannah realize her foot was broken. The men moved closer. They stood beneath her window, shivering in the winter cold. In Hannah's loggetto, dampness stained the walls and ceiling gray-brown. The coverlet that she had snatched from the bed and wrapped around her shoulders to keep out the chill of the night clung to her, holding her in a soggy embrace. She hiked it higher around her, the material heavy with her nightmares, traces of Isaac's scent, and oil from the skins of oranges. He had been fond of eating oranges in bed, feeding her sections as they chatted. She had not washed the blanket since Isaac had departed for the Levant to trade spices. One night he would return, steal into their bed, wrap his arms around her, and again call her his little bird. Until then, she would keep to her side of the bed, waiting. She slipped on her loose-fitting choppa with the economical movements of a woman accustomed to getting ready in haste, replaced the coverlet over her bed, and smoothed it as though Isaac still slumbered beneath. While she waited for the thud of footsteps and the blows on the door, she lit the charcoal brazier, her fingers so awkward with cold and nervousness that she had difficulty striking the flint against the tinder box. The fire smoldered, then flared and burned, warming the room until she could no longer see clouds of her breath in the still air. From the other side of the wall, she heard the gentle snoring of her neighbors and their 4 children. Peering through the eye-holes, now melting from the heat of her body, she stared. The tall man, his voice strident, pivoted on his heel and strode toward her building. The stout man trotted behind, managing 2 steps for each one of the tall mans. She held her breath, and willed Vicente to tell them what they wanted of her was impossible. To soothe herself, she stroked her stomach, hating the flatness of it, feeling the delicate jab of her pelvic bones through her nightdress. She felt slightly nauseated, and for a joyful moment experienced a flicker of hope, almost like the quickening of a child. But it was the smell of the chamber pot and the mildew of the walls playing havoc with her stomach, not pregnancy. She was experiencing her courses now, and would purify herself next week in the mikveh, the ritual bath that would remove all traces of blood. Soon she felt vibrations on the rickety stairs and heard mumbled voices approaching her door. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, straining to hear. They called her name as they pounded on the door, which made her want to dive into bed, pull the covers over her head, and lie rigid. From the other side of the wall, her neighbor, who had delivered twins last year and needed her rest, rapped for quiet. Hannah twisted her black hair into a knot at the back of her head, secured it with a hairpin. Before they could burst through the entrance, she flung open the door, about to shout to Vicente for assistance, but her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry of surprise. Between the 2 Christian men, pale as a scrap of parchment, stood the rabbi. Hannah backed into her room. Rabbi Abraham kissed his fingers and reached up to touch the mezuzah, the tiny box containing scripture fastened to the right-hand side of her door jamb. "Shalom Aleichem, and forgive us, Hannah, for disturbing you." The rabbi had dressed in haste. The fringe of his prayer shawl dangled unevenly around his knees, his yarmulke askew. "Aleichem shalom," she replied. She started to put a hand on the rabbi's arm, but stopped herself just in time. A woman was not to touch a man outside of her family, even when not having her monthly flow. "These men need to talk with you. May we come in?" Hannah averted her eyes, as she always did in the presence of a man other than Isaac. They should not enter. She was not properly dressed. Her room could not contain all 4 of them. In a voice pitched higher than normal, she asked the rabbi, "Your wife is..."